All right, welcome to Cultural Diversity. What I wanted to do was give you a basic introduction to what's going on here for the semester. So I primarily created this for my online classes, and I intend it to be just a basic introduction to the lesson. It doesn't replace the reading. It doesn't replace the other materials that's in the materials folder. Those are where you're really going to get primarily all the material you'll need for the quizzes and exams. But this is kind of just to get you thinking, to get you started, and to point you in the right direction. So one of the most important things that we're going to start looking at here is this notion of culture. What is culture? And so I'm going to make a little distinction here for you, because there are two types of culture that we're going to talk about. Today we'll talk a little bit about culture with a capital C, and then we'll also talk about culture with a lowercase c. And they are actually different. And so one of the questions that ends up coming up is, how are people the same all over the world? What do all people have in common? And when we start asking that question, we really in some ways start looking at this area that we might think of as biology. Because one of the things that people have in common is that we all, as humans, as Homo sapiens, have the ability to create and pass on our traditions, our beliefs, and symbols. And one of the most important symbols for sociologists is language. So when we talk about people passing on these abilities, what we're really talking about is our biological ability, what we're born with, the ability to learn. For example, humans are unique in our ability to learn complex language. So language is really what makes the ability to pass on traditions and beliefs possible. So culture, capital C culture, is really related to our biology. That is, it's related to this notion that we have a unique ability amongst animals to pass on these traditions and beliefs. Now, when we start looking at lowercase c cultures, that's what we'll spend a majority of this course looking at. And lowercase c cultures is the diversity we see amongst groups throughout the world. So when we talk about culture, we're talking about people's beliefs, their values. We'll talk more about this in a future lesson, but material culture, like the things that you can see that represent a culture, for example, clothing, types of housing that people live in. Also non-material culture, which are those beliefs and values. But when we see the lowercase c culture, this is what we're talking about, differences between groups. So individual cultures, what's unique about these groups versus other groups. So that's what we're going to be looking at in this course, is all of these different groups that exist in our very dynamic society. And so one of the things that is unique about us, and sort of why are we not just animals, or maybe the better question is, what makes us different or unique from other animals that share this earth? And it really is that ability, that capital C culture, the ability to create lowercase c cultures, to have unique and different groups who don't all have the same beliefs, the same values, don't all have the same religion, don't all have the same language, those sorts of things. So all that diversity that we see out there is really what separates us from most of the rest of the animal kingdom, and it's because of our ability to utilize language and to transmit these cultures and beliefs. So to sort of give you a kind of a starting point here with cultural diversity, we're going to be looking at different groups. So a lot of times when people hear cultural diversity, they instantly think of race, because race has played such an important role in our society historically and presently. And so we will be looking at race, but we'll also be looking at other elements of diversity that exist. So, for example, we'll be looking at ethnicity, not exactly the same thing as race. We'll be looking at gender. We'll be looking at sexual orientation. We'll be looking at age. We'll be looking at sort of all of these areas or realms in which people are different in society, in our modern societies. And so we'll take a look here, and you see this movie poster here. It's the good, the bad, and the ugly. And so if we actually zoom in here on the good, one of the nicest things about diversity is that diversity adds to the human experience. I mean, if you could just take a second and imagine if everyone in the world had the same exact beliefs, the same exact norms or values, the same exact sort of culture, all the things that make us unique. If it was all the same, you wouldn't have the sort of rich experience, human experience that we have. So diversity, from the perspective of me and the perspective of this course in sociology, is something that is a good thing because it really adds to the human experience. So we'll be looking at that diversity from that perspective. So that's the good. The bad side of this, and I should say the bad side, but one of the problems that comes up related to diversity is that there is a tendency, perhaps it's an inherent tendency, but nonetheless it's a tendency for people to view their own culture as superior to all other cultures, and we call that ethnocentrism. And so what that means is putting your group at the middle, putting your group in the center. And so looking at a different group or a different culture and saying, well, they're just different. I don't understand why they do those things. That's just weird. It's crazy. It's whatever. It's something that is very common in our society. It's very common for all of us to make sort of these rash judgments about different groups if we don't understand why they're doing the things they do. I will say that in all cultures, the things they do make perfect sense to them. Just like many people from different cultures could look at our culture and think, well, I can't believe they do some of the things they do. So in this course, of course, we're going to try to stay away from this notion of ethnocentrism. We're going to try to expand our horizons and try to understand groups in their own terms, using their own beliefs and their own values to try to figure out what's going on. And then lastly, we get to the ugly, and of course we've seen a lot of this based upon our own history. But one of the things, our country of course has a very storied history with this, but one of the things that we've seen in our country is that people are treated better or worse based upon how their culture or their group is rated. So it's that sort of ethnocentrism in action. You know, this is what leads to prejudice, right, which is our thoughts about people, about groups of people, or discrimination, which is the actions that people take, unfair actions against people based upon some trait. And so this is really the ugly sort of thing, is ethnocentrism and can lead to treating people better or worse. So based upon the group they belong to, not based upon any individual attribute or individual knowledge of that person, but just based upon the group they belong to. We've seen it, of course, with race and ethnicity. We see it with gender a lot. So people, for instance, may think that men and women have different capabilities and are different, and therefore, based upon their own assumptions, they may treat men and women very differently. Of course, we see it with age, and we see it with religion. We see it with all the types of diversity out there. So this is one of those potential ugly things that can happen. And we'll talk a lot more about that when we get to these chapters on prejudice and discrimination, and within some of the other chapters as well. So I just wanted to give you a basic introduction to cultural diversity and kind of where we're going to be heading this semester. So I wish you all a great semester. Be sure that you're using those resources that are put forward in each of the lessons. So as you go through each lesson, you need to read the chapters. You need to review all the materials in the material folders. There's PowerPoints. Oftentimes there's videos. I try to get video clips in there of things that relate. That's all fair game for the quizzes and exams, but there's a lot of sort of enriching materials there that'll maybe help you understand the chapter even better. Additionally, don't forget each lesson has those objectives for that lesson. So it's always a list of oftentimes 8, 9, 10 different things, and use those as sort of a study guide for you as you're going through and trying to learn the material. So kind of keep those, you might want to print them off and have them right there as you're reading, and kind of highlighting points that match up with those course objectives, because those are something that I use when I'm writing exams and I'm writing quizzes. So those can be very helpful for you going forward. Okay, so welcome to Cultural Diversity. I'm looking forward to a great semester with y'all, and I'll be seeing you around, at least virtually seeing you around online. So you'll be hearing from me, and have a great week.